This is a little chronicle of my attempts at finding a way that works well for me in rolling up these Stutata-type-shell inserts, the diskless casing rolled on the stars inserts. I'm not sure there's an official name for the inserts, but they're the inserts that Anthony shows in his Stutata insert shell article. I've shown some still pictures of a spilette matched with the flash tube filled, and the flash tube is filled pretty firm so it doesn't collapse easily. I've shown some still pictures of how I construct those very simply. That flash tube up to 1/2 inch up on the spilette is as long as 4 of the stars, since I'll be putting 4 rings of 6 each of these 3/4 inch stars. So that flash tube is that long. There's the bottom of the tube right there. Top of the star comes up 1/2 inch on that 2 3/4 inch spilette tube. So I'll have 2 1/4 inch sticking out the top of the insert initially. Sort of following Anthony's instructions, and he's done thousands of these now, I guess, and the Italians have done thousands of them. You fold over the paper a little bit. Since I want the paper folded over on the bottom of the insert, the width of 3 stars, that's 2 1/4 inches. So I put a little mark at 2 1/4 inches here, and I start lining up rows of stars. I want 4 rows of 6 stars. This plastic table is a little bowed, so the stars start rolling, and immediately doing it this way I found the stars rolling away from me very quickly. But I'll show you what I tried doing initially, and then sort of the steps of this process as I have refined it for myself. I'm not showing the right way to do this, I'm just showing the way that I have found now that works well for me in making these inserts. So I'm making 4 rows of 6 stars, 3/4 inch stars, about 3/4 of an inch tall, lined up on this, where's my 2 lined up on this 2 1/4 inch mark, and trying to run the rows pretty much parallel with the edges of the paper. Watching the videos from the Italian factories, you can see that this process can be refined and gotten more comfortable with, so it starts to go pretty quickly for them. So there's my 6 rows of stars coming up to the fold in the paper, and I'm going to go ahead and lay, actually I'm going to do what Alfredo does in Thailand. I'm going to capture the first stack of stars, put my time fuse in there, my spilette and flash bag in there, and start rolling this up. Anthony recommends folding down the sides of the paper as you go. You can see it's doable, and that's rolled up pretty well. But I never felt like I was really in control of that process. It always felt a little clunky. Sometimes the stars would try to roll away from me a little bit as I was rolling them up. So the next little refinement I made was I would take a spaghetti box, a 2-pound spaghetti box, and I'd stack that at the far side of the 4 rows of stars. And this was to try to keep the stars from rolling away from me as I rolled the stars up around the flash tube. So there I've got my 6 stacks of 4 stars, 4 rows of 6 stars. This works a little bit better for me. I'm trapping my first stack of stars, putting my flash tube in there, and then I start rolling, and I'm keeping this paper tight as I go. The spaghetti box moves away as I sort of keep it tight, and this works pretty well. I actually, this was not bad at all. And so I was able to get some pretty good tight, and the trick now is to tighten this wrap up so all those stacks of stars are held in there good and tight. I was able to get some pretty good inserts rolled this way. I'm rolling up the whole insert, tightening it up. I'm going to do a tongue fold on the bottom where you push in all the paper from one side, push it out to the sides like that, pinch the paper in, which creates the tongue, and then fold the tongue over like that. And then up top, I'm going to trim that down just a little bit. That's gotten just a little bit long as it telescoped just a little bit on me. Normally when I'm rolling the inserts and not trying to demo it, I'm trying to keep that paper from telescoping as I go. And so what I'm doing is folding down the paper to the base of the split, making sure that flash bag is down in there good and tight, tearing the paper down to that fold line. Now I start pleating the paper to the side of the split, all the turns at once, going to the side of the split like this. And this creates a fairly good seal at the base of the split. Not completely fireproof, but that'll be completely fireproofed later on. And you can see that made a pretty nice insert. Looks pretty good and symmetrical, round on the top, pretty round on the bottom. I do notice that now and then these get a little bit out of round, but that is what an insert's supposed to look like pretty much before I spike it. My next step in trying to refine this process and maybe get it a little less clunky. This is the trick. This rolling of the inserts is the tricky step. Spiking it's a no-brainer, but rolling the inserts, rolling all the stars up, is what was a little tricky for me. So I'll cut another piece of paper and show you what my next iteration of trying to refine this process was for me. With my length stars, this first piece of paper is 7 1/4 inches wide. This is 30-pound paper, 36-inch wide. So I'm making a strip 7 1/4 long, 7 1/4 wide by 36 inches wide. 7 1/4 wide by 36 inches long. My next step was to take this little, I've got a section of 4-inch PVC, almost cut in half, it's a little less than half of the tube, screwed to a piece of plywood. I've got to mark in 2 1/4 inches, which is my fold over length. I'm folding the paper over about 1 1/8 inches. Laying this in here with that fold, with the edge of the paper at the end of the jig, that folded line, up about 1/4 inch. And then I'm starting to stack my rows of stars in there. This, instead of the spaghetti box, was helping me keep the stars from rolling away and escaping on me. This keeps all the stars in this central concave area. And this was working pretty well. But once again, I just didn't feel like, and it's probably because I've not done thousands of them, I just never felt like I really had control over this whole assembly as I rolled it. Oh, I got an escapee star somewhere here. Here it is. It was just hiding behind my paper. So there I've got my 4 rings of 6 stars lined up. The edge of the paper's on the jig. The stars are lined up with my black mark on the jig, which is over 2 1/4 inches. And then once again, I bring the paper over, lay the flash tube in there to trap it, and I start. Actually, I'm going to bring this all up just a little bit more. Lay that in there and start bringing this around. And if I roll the whole insert as I go, bringing it toward me, the stars stay right there. Start folding in a little bit on the ends to keep it all together. And I was able to keep all of this pretty darn, if I snug it up in the paper a little bit, keep this pretty well rolled up. Then I slide it out of the jig and once again start working it, rolling it up tight, keeping the edges of the paper aligned. So this, once again, I was able to produce inserts that I just put into my 13 timed shell. This is rolling up pretty good and round, and it's functional. But, you know, like I say, short of doing 1,000 of these, I just never felt like I was really in control of the process. It's functional. I could practice it a whole lot if I was going to make thousands of inserts. I could either make it work this way or with a spaghetti box or just loose on a table like the Italians do. But I'm not going to make thousands of inserts. I'm going to make a dozen, and then I'm going to make a dozen maybe in a couple months. So I wanted to come up with a way that I felt a little more in control of, a little more masterful when I'm making it. So now I've come up, Dan Hupp Custom suggested looking at the idea of the corona, for singular, corone plural, that the Italians have used on occasion. And I came up with making these little assemblies. This is simply a stack of 7 stars, 6 fit around 1, with a band of craft gum tape around them. They assemble very quickly. And so this is my homemade version of a quickly assembled corone. I can whip one of these out in a few seconds. And that whole assembly stays together very nicely. So in order to assemble the whole stack ready to roll, what I do is simply push out the center star in the corona, and slide the flash tube down in there. Push the central star out of the second corona, slide that down over the whole assembly, lining up the flats on the stacks. Repeat that 4 times. And now I'm ready to roll. I measure in my 2 1/4 inches. Make sure this whole stack is good and tight and the flash bag is down at the bottom of that stack. Line the bottom up with my 2 1/4 inch mark. And this now feels like, oh yeah, you know, this I can maintain control over. The stacks are staying together. I can steer the paper a little bit as I go, keeping it straight on the stack. The whole thing feels like it's coming together nice and solidly. Everything's good and solid in there. The flash bag's down at the bottom of the star stack, so I do my tongue fold. Push this down and tear it. Do my top plate. This to me now, although it's training wheels rolling, Anthony will agree it's training wheels rolling. The Italians might scoff at it, although they approached something similar by pumping out their 6-star Corone pumped rings to try to speed up this process. So I'm not doing something completely unheard of in this process. And this produces a really nice, solid, symmetrical, completely round on the bottom, completely round on the top insert, ready to spike. So for now, like I say, doing a dozen at a time every couple of months, that process feels like it's really rolling a very nice solid insert where all the stars are staying solid in their stacks. So that first 36-inch strip of paper created 5 turns of 30-pound paper around the insert. That's 5 times 30, 150 pounds of paper on here. I'll be doing that again after this first spiking, wrapping it again with another 36-inch strip. That's another 150 pounds of paper. That's a total of 300 quote pounds of paper on here. And for and this will be about a 2.5-inch shell. For a 2.5-inch shell, Fulcanelli would recommend about 350 pounds of paper. This has 300 on it. So this is approximately the amount of paper Fulcanelli would recommend on a shell this size. Now I'm going to spike this. Put a clove hitch around the top. I like to come off the left side of this split initially, but that's a matter of preference. I'm going to snug that down to the bottom of the split to seal that area where the paper meets the split as much as possible. Finish snugging that up. Trim off the excess string, and then I'll spike. Go into the first gap between the rows of stars, coming down to the bottom, straight across the bottom to the gap on the other side. This time I go to the right of the split, wrap around to this gap next to the first one I did. Go down that gap, across the bottom, left side of the split, to the one remaining gap on that side, straight across, and to the left side of the split again, and then down to one of the gaps and spiral. This is pretty much typical spiking. I'm using 2 strands of 8-ply cotton to keep the spiking fairly thin, to build up the diameter on these as little as possible while still putting some good strong spiking on here. My horizontals are just a little closer than the verticals are. I like to put the horizontals about 1 star tall, about 3/4 of an inch apart. So there's the first spiking. Pretty simple and basic. Pull that final 1/2 inch good and tight. Make sure that spiking's down around the split real good. Making sure all these little nubs, corners are shoved in at the base. So a pretty good round base, pretty good round top. That's now ready for that second application of paper I was talking about. This application of paper wants to lap up onto the spilette. This will be bottlenecked about 3/4 of an inch. That's why I left plenty of spilette sticking out of the top here. I want to bottleneck that up about 3/4 of an inch. Tongue fold on the bottom. Make sure I've got enough paper to come up and create a tongue fold on the bottom. Wrap this up real nice and tight, keeping the edges of the paper aligned. I am able to steer the paper just a little bit as it's rolled up. Once again, that's a 36-inch strip of 30-pound paper. Tongue folded on the bottom. And this, not being torn and pleated down around it, this bottlenecking here is what creates a really good fireproof top. I'm pinching this and bringing all the paper around the spilette at once with no folds under any other folds. I want all those folds coming up and going up alongside the spilette so there's no gaps in what I'm about to do that will allow fire in there when all that hot pressurized gas hits the insert from the main shell break. Now I'm ready for a second spiking, very similar to the first, except for one little difference. Put a clove hitch around that top. I find it's easier to make a clove hitch complete on this instead of a half hitch and then casting the clove hitch over there. Since I'm going around this paper, it's easier for me to work a complete clove hitch down around all that paper. I want to bring that around the paper down at its base fold there. It's really cinching in good and tight around that split, bottlenecking all that paper around there. Now, instead of starting my vertical spiking right away, this is Anthony's tip and trick of spiraling up to the top of the paper, just above the top of the paper. Now start spiraling down with close wraps. This really seals and fireproofs that whole area where the paper meets the spilette. Very critical to have these inserts survive that blast when the main shell opens. The glue on this is really seeping into the adjacent string and will create a really nice, solid, impervious, fireproof necking around this whole thing. And then at the bottom, I wrap down as far as I can, bringing that paper in there. Okay, now that's completely and nicely bottlenecked. Now I'm ready to start my verticals and repeat the exact same spiking process as before. Start it on the left, go to the right, go around. Make sure all these little points in that bottom fold are pushed in. Go around to the remaining two verticals and spike them. So there ends up being 6 verticals on the whole deal. And the verticals and the crossings cross right in the middle of the shell. Anthony emphasizes that reinforces that one weak area where the bottom of the flash bag is. Go on down and apply my horizontals. Where I made my first horizontals cinch down here at the bottom, I can see where that's raised a little bit. I want to stay inside that to build up that diameter as little as possible. I'm trying to fit these snug 6 in a ring in an 8-inch shell, and I don't want to build this diameter much up. So I'm keeping my horizontal inside those first horizontals on the first spiking, and when I get to the top I'll do the same thing here. Then once I've gone all the way around, I can see telegraphing through here where my horizontals are in the first spiking. I keep these second spiking horizontals in between those first spiking horizontals. Once again, evenly reinforcing the insert and minimizing the buildup of the diameter as much as possible. So I'm just about up to my first doubled horizontals in the first spiking. I'm going to keep just inside of those and finish with a half hitch. So that's currently my fledgling beginning take at trying to follow along in Anthony's process and utilizing the skills and limitations that I have right now while still trying to produce a really nice tight little insert. I'll go ahead and scratch this, put a little NC BP slurry prime on half of it, dunk it in BP grain powder, and put a fold of 2 pieces of black match over it, held on with a good tight clove hitch and some wraps of wax string, and fuse this for insertion into a shell. But I'm pleased with how solid and nicely these are coming together, especially using the corone in there, the 4 corone clusters of stars.